When it comes to business analytic projects, end user adoption is the real measure of success. You've purchased this amazing new business intelligence tool, you implemented it under budget, and you went live on time. A phenomenal victory. No, seriously, amazing. But for some reason, your end users are still dumping data into Excel, massaging it, and almost blatantly refusing to use this tool. What is wrong with them? This took months of your time and effort just to bring them this amazing new tool. So here goes. I need you to listen up because this conversation is going to be kind of hard. The deal is, it's you, not them. You failed to realize that business intelligence is a people-centric tool, or more precisely, a business user tool. Business intelligence is different. Unlike your other systems in your organization, say your point of sale system, where sales associates must enter in or scan in items, you can't tell an end user, hey, you will read this report and based on this data, you will make actionable decisions. Now, it doesn't really work that way, and I'd love to see it if you actually said that to somebody and see their reaction. But what it comes down to is business intelligence is change management, aka how people react to new processes and tools. There's a reason why at Lodestar we have a little saying, people, process, tools, in that order. People are the first part of the equation. This isn't a revolutionary new idea. It's common knowledge that people will make or break your business intelligence initiative, simply because they can choose not to use it. But if this is common knowledge, and we should be focusing on people, then why are we always so caught up in the functionality of a tool? Well, if we can be honest with one another, working with people can, it can kind of suck. I know there's days when I'm not an absolute peach to work with. I mean, people can intentionally be difficult, they're political, and that's even if you can get their attention in the first place. Here they are complaining about not having the right data, the application's too hard to understand, or they have to access several systems just to answer a simple question. So you, being the person who you are, you take the initiative. You say enough's enough. We're going to start the process of looking for a better way. You call a meeting to get all the necessary information for the new system, a system that's going to be there to help them, and what do? They don't even show up. People, man! Now, I'm not saying that this happens in every organization, and I'm not saying that the right tool isn't important, but what I am saying is end user adoption is a well thought out, people-centered strategy. And it's one of those things that you shouldn't just go in and try to wing it. Now, there's a couple of prerequisites to our strategy. You have to have proper requirements gathering, and of course you have to have good data. We're going to go more into that. And then we're going to talk about the iterative adoption process, where you're going to repeat the same process starting with you and your team all the way through the end of the enterprise. And then we're going to quickly touch on training and how one size does not fit all, and wrap up today as business intelligence as a journey. Requirements gathering is an absolute prerequisite to any end user adoption strategy. Don't wait until the product's go live state to start the adoption process. It starts from the very beginning. Even before the RFP is written and you start comparing tools, engage with your end users. It's a simple conversation. So Janice, I hear you constantly expressing your frustration about working with XYZ system. We're just starting to discuss the idea of looking for a new tool. You know, as an expert in your area who understands the business processes and the data needed, we would absolutely love some of your time to hear more about, what frustrates you and what you think an ideal tool should have. See, you're building support for your project even before you purchase the tool, because now Janice feels important. And she is. She's on the front line battling the current system and the available data every day. Now, not everybody's going to be as supportive as Janice because, well, let's face it, change is scary. Those who resist change are equally as important as Janice. They will literally hand you a list of objections that you'll need in order to get your project funded. Plus, these vocal naysayers might have insight into obstacles and pitfalls that you hadn't foreseen. Think of them as an incredibly powerful risk mitigation tool. Another reason why requirements gathering is so important is that it's still ranked as the #1 risk by Gartner for any business intelligence initiative. Even though requirements gathering is the #1 area of risk and the cornerstone of any user adoption program, so many organizations are still not doing their homework. Again, it comes back to that people factor. One of the issues is that IT and finance are typically the departments that champion the business intelligence initiative. And rightly so, both of these departments are highly analytical and data driven. However, they're typically not thought of as having these excellent soft skills. In their mind, to a lot of them, that's kind of mushy-gushy stuff. These people who are highly analytical, what they are, they're problem solvers. So, although today is not a requirements gathering workshop, this brings me to my first of 2 tips. Check your brain at the door. Active listening. First and foremost, that's what it is. It's listening. You're there to listen, not solve problems. If you're actively listening, you should be out of your own head and using all of your senses. Watch how they respond to various questions. Does the tone in their voice change? Are they making eye contact? These nonverbal cues are just as important as what they're saying. Plus, when you're problem solving, you're focused on you, and I guarantee that this means you're going to miss something crucial. Alright, second tip. Most people know to ask, what don't you like? They understand that the tools should be relieving a pain of some sort, but they forget to ask about what do they like about the current system or what is working. You know, in my past life, I worked for a company that was in desperate need of a new BI system. The old system was rigid, making it difficult to report. It lacked an intuitive user interface, and bringing together dispersed data sources, well, you can just forget about it. Clearly, they were in a need of a new tool. So, after comparing products and satisfying all these pain points, and then spending 12 weeks implementing a new system, the tool was ready. It was great. It was easy to use, and now it made data previously available only to a few, available to everybody with the proper security. However, we were so focused on fixing the pain that we didn't even ask about which features or functions they loved. It turned out the old project did have one really cool feature. It had this crazy simple dynamic dating feature. Unfortunately, the new tool didn't have any functionality remotely similar to that. Now, was this a deal breaker? No. But it was now an end-user adoption hurdle that we had to overcome. If we would have just asked one very simple question, we could have set proper expectations and curbed the frustrations and disappointments of our end users. You know, like previously stated, requirements gathering is extremely important. I mean, it is the #1 risk to your project. So Lodestar now offers an entire workshop dedicated to the psychology of requirements gathering. This course combines change management leadership with actual requirement gathering techniques. Second prerequisite to any end user adoption strategy is data. Now that you have your users' requirements, now you got to ask yourself, do we have proper data? Is it clean and is it readily accessible? One analogy we like to use here at Lodestar is the Chinese food restaurant. So picture this. You're out with your spouse or significant other and you're at a local restaurant. It doesn't even have to be Chinese food. You have a wonderful meal, you have great conversation, and later that evening you become violently ill. What's the first thing you do that next morning? You get on the phone, you post on Facebook, and you tweet to all your friends and family about the horrible experience and advise them to just stay away. Data is treated the exact same way. If I'm CEO and I'm running a report that has inaccurate data and I get burned while I present it to the board, guarantee that it will be the only time I use that data. But it gets worse. I will then go tell the entire team and everyone else the data is not trustworthy, and your BI initiative will die a slow and painful death. People will continue to pull the data and dump it into Excel and validate and massage the data to meet their reporting needs. This is not a good use of your time or resources. But what's that one thing that might persuade you to go back to that restaurant? I think you all know the answer to this. You've seen it before. Under new management. That's right. Sometime later, you drive past that same Chinese food restaurant and you see an under new management sign. You'd probably consider trying it again. So the moral of the story is, if you had bad data, you need to fix it. And then you need to put out your under new management sign. Admit that there's been a problem and communicate how it's been fixed to better serve the business. Now, as you know, as I previously mentioned, if you've been to any of Lodestar's workshops, trainings, webinars, or watched our YouTube videos, more than likely you've heard this Chinese food analogy. But this analogy is so powerful, we encourage you to use it in your organization. Take our stories and make them yours. I guarantee when you start looking at your data, you're going to ask yourself, are we serving bad Chinese food? Okay, now that we've met our prerequisites, we're actually ready for a user adoption approach. The strategy that I like to take, or that we at Lodestar takes, is an iterative process. Every level on this inverted pyramid, you're going to apply the exact same steps. And I like how Alan Hamilton, a social business consultant, says it. The advantages of the iterative adoption is that you get better and better at bringing people on board with each iteration. You start with your own team, and then you get the champion on board, and then the early adopters. You go through a complete cycle of introduction, demonstration, implementation, and support for these users. The key, however, for your project is that with each iteration, your team grows. It grows to include the newly adopted users. Thus, when you make it as far as the executive or the department level, your team of advocates and supporters include both champions and early adopters. Here's the Lodestar proven adoption process. As you move up the pyramid, you'll need to change your evangelism, your publicity, and your training to suit the audience needs. And hence, that's why the first step is understanding where your users are coming from, their backgrounds, their perceptions, and the attitudes towards the project. It's like requirements gathering, but for the project kickoff. Remember that list of objections and pitfalls your naysayers provided you months ago? Once again, it's going to pay dividends. This list of objections you used to get the project funded is now going to be used to handle your user adoption objections in the meeting. Once you've gathered your requirements and you know the background, the perceptions, and the attitudes, you're ready for your kickoff meeting. The first thing you want to do is you want to explain the vision of what you're setting out to do. Every BI initiative is more than, well, we need a better reporting solution. It's exciting. It's about how you look at increasing sales, drive down costs, understand why your customers buy from you, leveraging big data, and basically how you're going to dominate in your industry. This is all very cool stuff. It's the meat and potatoes of why we are in business. Second, you're going to show the team and address the group's pain points. If possible, don't tell them. Show them how the solution is relieving pain points, how the solution provides an intuitive interface for the analytically challenged, how there's now one version of truth and no more need wasting time arguing about who's got the right numbers, how the data is clean and readily available for the entire organization, not the select few. If you don't know how to give a demo, check out Lodestar's YouTube channel or attend one of our workshops, How to Give a Demo That Doesn't Suck. You don't have to be brilliant at it, but being able to demonstrate your software well is one of the easiest ways to get buy-in for end user adoption. So the third step in your kickoff is end user training. Then after the kickoff, it's a continuous cycle of support and feedback. Once they're self-sustaining, ask them to commit to the project and extend this approach to the next group in the inverted pyramid. Remember, we're building an army of analytical evangelists. Your first, and in most cases, the most important evangelist is your champion. A champion is a highly respected leader in your organization that has passion for your project. It's their job to publicize and spread the enthusiasm to other leaders in the organization. They also have the awesome responsibility of clearing political roadblocks. Within a day of being at a client site, I can easily spot projects or initiatives that don't have a strong executive backing. It's simple. It's just not a priority. People don't show up to meetings, and if they do, they're just not engaged. The opposite is also true. When this is a leadership priority, even before I show up to gather requirements or lay down coaching rules, people know who I am. I'll introduce myself at the coffee station to a random stranger. I'll say, hi, I'm Melissa, I'm with Lodestar Solutions, and they'll say something like, oh, you're here to help with the new analytical initiative. I heard we're bringing a firm on to help us handle our data so that we can all make better decisions. These conversations don't just happen. It's because the leadership is doing a good job at communicating the goals of the organization. And it can't just be lip service. Organizational culture is set by the values senior management exhibits. In order for the solution to be fully embraced, senior management must set a precedent. This doesn't mean that they must be experts of the technology or even be analytically minded, but show understanding how the tool can empower their team. In Simon Sinek's book, Leaders Eat Last, he gives examples of how leadership is solely responsible for the culture of an organization. One of my favorites, and that I think speaks to converting an organization to an analytical culture, is the story of Naval Captain David Marquette. Like many executives, Captain Marquette grew through the ranks through hard work and using his knowledge to establish a sense of control to those who reported to him. It was Marquette's dedication to being the best the Navy could offer that led him to the rank of captain. However, in the past, he was taught that it was his superior knowledge and his ability to communicate orders well that gave him control. Marquette was told that he would become captain of the USS Olympia, a nuclear-powered fast-track submarine. These small, nimble subs are used to hunt and destroy the enemy's boomer submarines, large subs that carry and launch nuclear missiles. Like in the past, Marquette prepared by studying every aspect of the USS Olympia and its crew for a year. However, 2 weeks before he was to take command of the Olympia, he received change orders that he would now be captain of the USS Santa Fe. The Santa Fe was a new vessel class. It was slightly longer than a football field. Plus, unlike the crew of the Olympia, the Santa Fe was ranked last in nearly every readiness and retention measure the Navy had. This is all that he knew the day he took captain of the USS Santa Fe. This was going to be an issue since Captain Marquette in the past had relied on his superior technical knowledge and commanding authority as the basis of his leadership. His reaction, unfortunately, like many modern leaders, was to hide his lack of knowledge and rely on the crew to fill in the gaps. Instead of asking questions to help him learn, Captain Marquette defaulted to what he knew best, being in control, and immediately started issuing orders. There was no question who was in charge. The next day out at sea, he decided to run a drill. He ordered a nuclear reactor to be manually shut down to simulate a reactor failure. At first, things went very well. The crew performed all the necessary checks and precautions and switched the submarine's motor to battery power. To see how the crew would react under slightly more pressure, he gave an order to the officer on the deck, the most senior officer, ahead 2/3. The officer on the deck then gave the order to the helmsman. However, nothing happened. Captain Marquette asked the nervous helmsman, "What's the problem?" To the helmsman's replied, "There's no 2/3 setting." Dumbfounded, Captain Marquette asked the officer of the deck if he knew that there was no 2/3 setting, and to that the officer replied yes. Marquette asked him then why did you give the order? The officer replied, "Because you told me to." This is when Marquette realized his crew had been trained to follow orders. The issue was that they had all the information, but none of the authority. From this experience, Captain Marquette realized that the role of a leader is not to bark orders and not to be completely responsible for the success or failure of the mission. It's the leader's job to take responsibility for the success of each crew member. In an organization, a leader is the captain of the ship. It's the leader's job to make sure that all the team members are trained and feel comfortable to perform the duties of their job. Good leaders empower those who know more about the day-to-day operations and the issues of the task at hand with the authority to make proper decisions. One important change that Captain Marquette made was he banished the word permission. Instead of, "Sir, request permission to submerge the ship," permission was replaced with the word intent. "Sir, I intend to submerge the ship." This still left the chain of command in place, but created a psychological shift within the crew. The person performing the action now owned the action, instead of just carrying it out as an assigned task. This is huge for cultures that lack ownership or accountability. I also see it as a major criteria for organizations who truly want to be an analytical culture. 4 times more than the Navy's average, officers developed under Captain Marquette's culture of intent and accountability go on to command their own vessels. If you want more information on how to change the culture of your organization to one that empowers its employees with accountability, Captain Marquette outlined the steps he took in his book, Turn the Ship Around, a true story of turning followers into leaders. I highly recommend this book to anybody listening to this webinar today. At the Executive Kickoff and Training, you are now the leader, empowering executives to lead their crew better with this new technology. They're not going to be masters of the technology. However, they do have the knowledge and the expertise to better understand how the tool you're offering can strengthen their team and the organizational strategy. before the meeting, it's your job to understand where your end users are coming from, the backgrounds, perceptions, and attitudes they have towards the project. Start the meeting with the champion explaining the vision and why the organization has chosen this particular tool. If you have a decent champion, this should not be the first time they're hearing about tool XYZ. A good champion has been evangelizing and publicizing the tool and the team efforts to his and peers all along. Don't just explain how the organization will benefit, but explain to them how they will personally benefit. Now, I don't want to be harsh, but this is typically the point where project adoption fails. In most business analytic initiatives, it usually starts with a single user or a single department struggling because of the lack of access to the information they need to perform their job well or to compete in their industry. Selling the vision upstream can literally be an uphill battle. This goes back to knowing your audience. Most executives or decision makers are not analytical, they're strategic. Both skills are very valuable and necessary. But what you need to do is you need to put it in terms they understand. You need to demonstrate how growing the business analytical program adds to the bottom line and how it aligns the goals of the organization with the day-to-day tasks of operations. Once you have established how this tool will help the organization meet its strategic objectives, share the inverted user adoption pyramid and gingerly, but to the point, let them know that if the adoption of this tool fails to move past this level, it might be their fault. However, also remind them that if the organization embraces the technology and a new analytical culture, that they're a huge part of that success. One sign your organization might have a cultural issue is to ask your IT department how many similar solutions they have sitting on the shelf or implemented with little to no use. If the answer is more than 2, this might be cause for concern, which means you really need to get your champion involved. In a recent Cognos executive kickoff and training, one of my clients made a brilliant move. Just before we dove into a 2-hour high-level workspace advanced training, she showed them all the new available data that had audited and made available thus far. This was information previously unavailable or hard to get. There was instant excitement and buy-in in the room. A week later, I knew the training had been a success when the VP of Customer Service turned to a manager who was unable to attend the kickoff and stated that he really should have been there because it would help him understand why they've decided to implement Cognos and how it's helping them with their issues in the call center. She then turned to the internal project manager and myself and thanked us for the training. You can only imagine how excited I was. For this organization alone. Over 16 weeks of requirements gathering, vetting data, design and build to finally seeing the dream come alive, it was a great moment. And on top of it, I am truly excited for this organization, and I know that their new analytical culture is truly going to propel them ahead of their competition. Each training and kickoff should be tailored to the audience. I typically develop 3. Once again, this goes back to understanding where your users are coming from, their background, and perceptions and attitudes towards the project. It's requirements gathering for a successful kickoff. For instance, executive training are characteristically shorter and to the point. No more than 2 hours because, well, let's face it, executives tend to have ADD. They want high-level bullet points and to know where this is going to strengthen the bottom line. Conversely, though, depending on the analytical maturity of your organization, you might have an executive team that's highly analytical and data savvy. Presenting the novice material might leaving them wanting more and thinking that your solution's too fluffy or weak. While middle managers stereotypically have the desire to fish for themselves, meaning they want to know how to perform some light querying and analysis in the system. Whereas your power users will need a 2 to 5 day in-depth training. Also, one other note, it might seem obvious, but acknowledging their learning curve frustration is super important. Remind them how frustrating it was when Microsoft Office moved from the toolbar to the ribbon. How this pain is also temporary, and that the added functionality will be worth the change. And that in time, they're going to be old hacks at this tool, asking themselves, how do they ever function without the assistance of this amazing new software? It's kind of like, how do we live before the internet? How did we really decide where we were going to eat? And I don't even think my kids know what a phone book is. And heaven's sakes, oh my gosh, if you want to take a vacation before the internet and you've never been there, you either had to go to the library and figure out what to do there or hire a travel agent. Business analytics is the exact same way. Once you get the program rolling, they're going to be like, how did we live without this? Remember, BI is a journey, not a destination. It's an evolving process. So be realistic on your adoption timeline. People are ritualistic. When Microsoft Office changed from the toolbar to the ribbon, I must have printed at least 200 pages on accident. My clicker muscles had memory, and it took at least 200 before I retained the proper muscle memory. Also, set realistic expectations up front. Once they see the power in this, your executive team and end users are going to want it all now. They're going to want dashboards and mobile and Microsoft integration. They literally are going to want the world now. This is when you underpromise and overdeliver. I know, I personally have difficulty with this, but start working on conservative estimates. A good rule of thumb is to take your original timeline and add 20%, because I don't care what project you're working on, there is always a gotcha moment. And it's unlikely that developing a business analytics program is your sole responsibility. We all have day jobs, and carving out time to work on projects that move the business forward can be challenging and stressful. I understand that right now you're heavily focused on just getting this application off the ground, but take a minute to look at where you are in the business analytics maturity spectrum, and where do you want to be a year from now? Does that change your end user adoption strategy? IBM's analytical quotient measures your organization on the analytical maturity path and assesses your organization's decision-making power, analytical capabilities, as well as the culture that surrounds it. In short, the AQ is a tool to help you understand where your organization is on the business analytics journey, and to think about the long-term vision of your organization's business analytics program. If your company's current maturity level is novice, that's not a bad thing, but it's important to understand as you're working on gaining end user adoption. At the novice level, your organization's probably struggling with one version of truth. It might own several BI or BA tools, but the information's all siloed. There's tremendous opportunity here. The smallest change could have a huge effect on the bottom line. Just getting one version of truth can save hours of meeting time trying to determine who has the right number. You could actually use that time to determine what the number means and what's the plan of action that we should take in order to capitalize on that number. So the question now is, where is your company on the path? What's your next move to move towards business analytics mastery? And how does that affect your end user adoption strategy? So to recap, proper requirements and data are an absolute prerequisite. You'll never get adoption of the tool if it doesn't meet the end user's needs. Plus, if they get sick off bad data, your project's already dead in the water. Adoption is an iterative process starting with you and the early adopters. Before every kickoff and training, you need to do your homework on the background and the perceptions and attitudes that these new end users have towards the project. Training should be size appropriate to the audience. And business analytics is a journey with an evolving destination. I truly believe that leaders are readers. Here's a list of resources that I've mentioned throughout this presentation. I also want to mention Lodestar's How to Influence Executives and the Organization with Data and Analytics course. We surveyed our clients and asked them, what skills do you and your colleagues lack the most, and what kind of courses would you personally benefit from? The top 5 responses all had to do with influence. And it's a no-brainer that end user adoption, that whole entire people factor, is all about influence. One of the key areas of influence is commitment, and commitment can be as simple as just trying something. We use a product called Cognos Insight. It's a free desktop application that you can download from Analytics Zone to start that whole entire commitment process. Because what it does, it shows them how easy it can be for even the most analytically challenged minded person to work with and start understanding their own data. Plus, it's in a non-threatening environment. So once again, if you're interested in downloading and starting to play with that software, it's at IBM's website called analyticszone.com. I also want to let you know that very soon we are rolling out a brand new course that we're extremely excited about. It's called Active Listening Through Improvisation. See, people tend to be poor listeners because instead of listening, they're thinking about what they're going to say next. Whereas in improv, you are active listening to the max. You never know what your partner is going to say or what they're going to do. You have to be totally responsive to your entire environment, which means you have to be focused. You have to be actively listening. If you want more information about Lodestar's business coaching program or any of our private or public course offering, just visit us on the web at lodestarsolutions.com.